We're going to get to so many issues in football. Right off the top, though, we want to address the Christian Petracca story. Tom Morris, the chief football writer of 9 News, is with us tonight. Tom, you've been down at the hospital. He is convalescing at the Alfred, I believe. What's the latest on Christian Petracca's situation?
This is a really serious situation for Christian Petracca, who was moved from the Epworth to the Alfred on Monday night. He had a blood transfusion. The surgery was serious, so much so there were fears at one point that he would lose his spleen. In the end, he was diagnosed with a grade 5 spleen laceration. Let me tell you this, there's no grade 6. That's as serious as it gets without actually losing the spleen. He spent the last couple of days in the intensive care unit. Alan Richardson tells us tonight, the Melbourne football boss, that he'll be transferred out of that tomorrow or the next day. I think it's unlikely that he leaves hospital before the weekend at the absolute earliest. And from a football perspective, Eddie, it is highly unlikely he plays again this season. I'm told the best case scenario is 10 to 12 weeks, which takes us to the end of the home and away season. And don't underestimate the seriousness of what's going on. His injuries are comparable to a car crash victim. That's how serious it is.
OK, Tom, a question without notice to you. Have we found out yet what happened between, yes, you're right to go on, and no, you better go to the hospital, to now you've had your spleen removed and you're out for the season? Seemed to escalate pretty quickly.
It did. Alan Richardson's given us this statement tonight, the Melbourne footy boss. He said, Chris, I want to make it clear that we have full confidence in how our medical team responded and the procedures that were followed. Their expertise and swift actions have been crucial in managing Christian's injury and subsequent recovery. He wanted to play on Christian Petracca, but there were Collingwood players on the field in the second quarter that remarked to Petracca that he should go off. That's how unwell he looked.
Yeah, he actually looks at there, as you can see. We're going to get more into detail on what can happen now, because my understanding is you can have delayed bleeding and decompensation in this situation where you might be seen to be OK and then the bleeding starts to happen, and that's where the pain goes up, the heart rate goes up, the blood pressure comes down, and you get into serious trouble as the blood comes through the laceration, if you like. So there is reasons why he went onto the ground, but we'll get to those in a few moments. Lord, I want to ask you, you are one of the few people that can actually speak firsthand to this. You lost the spleen playing football in a preliminary final against the Sydney Swans, the famous Tony Lockett point. Take us through your scenario.
Yeah, Ed, I was able to keep the spleen in the end, a bit like Christian Petracca with the moment. But just mine was more innocuous than Christian's. I just went to hip and shoulder and had my elbow come into my chest here with a Mark Bay's hip and shoulder. And just when I was talking to Tom Morris about it a couple of days ago about the injury, Tom asked me, how long do you think? And I said, well, I lost 8 kilos.
So take us through this. You get up and you played on, is that right?
Yeah, so I did the same thing, but 1.5 litres of blood was in my stomach, so the loss of 1.5 litres.
So just take us through it though. Yeah. So you got up, you felt a bit sore?
You feel like you're winded.
Right.
Yeah, you
ran back to position.
I went off for a while.
Yeah.
And then likewise thought I may have just been winded, so I went back on the ground. Half time came about and I felt like I was just losing all the colour in my face.
So a bit like Petracca again?
Exactly the same thing. Couldn't really concentrate on anything anybody was saying because the pain started to get so strong. And pretty much by that night I went home because unfortunately in King's Cross Hospital in Sydney they didn't know how to treat. They filled me with morphine. Suddenly I felt better, got home. Lucky my parents were there because otherwise I could have gone to sleep or fell unconscious. Would have died in that situation because of the blood loss. Asked my mum could she take me to the bathroom, pass blood. They called Dr. Bruce Reid up, and I'm writhing in the bed by this stage. Just an absolute horrific pain, the worst pain. Whenever I hear spleen, I just feel for the person because the pain is that excruciating. Bruce Reid said, can you just settle down? Have you got shoulder pain? And I said, my shoulder pain is killing me. He said, call an ambulance, he's got a ruptured spleen. And I was pretty much in agony. They said the good news is the bleeding has stopped. The bad news is you've got 8 days of pretty much a lot of pain ahead of you while the blood subsides. I lost 8 kilos and I didn't feel like I was right, to be honest, for about 6 months.
All right, and the pain was excruciating.
Excruciating, absolutely excruciating.
OK, so it's not the...
excruciating pain.
Sorry, Tom?
He's in excruciating pain at the moment as well, Christian Petracca. He has been for several days.
And he's got more to come by the sounds of it. Now, Mason Cox had a similar situation last year. He played out the game, trained, and then went to trained during the week, then he went to hospital. Over the years, John Stevens, Lee Colbert lost a pancreas and a spleen. Tom Lonergan, of course, a kidney. Sam Newman nearly bled out on the rub-down table in the rooms during the game. The doctors left him there, only his sister being a nurse and his father coming down, and again he passed blood in his urine. and he was able to go to hospital, and he had multiple transfusions. So it begs the question then, what do we do about it? Now, at least half a dozen club doctors have said today they need the equipment to be put into these situations. Now, Tom, it's as simple as this. If there was, for $200,000, a hospital-grade X-ray, CAT scan and ultrasound machine there. By the way, it takes 5 minutes to get the ultrasound and 1 minute for the X-ray, so less than a concussion test. That would have found out that he had broken ribs, first of all, and possibly that there were other issues to go there. If you want to go and get a full-on MRI machine, it costs a couple of million. Probably by the time you build it and muck around with it and do all that sort of stuff, it's probably, maybe $3 million. Not much when you think of the MCG, for example, 45 games plus finals per year, plus cricket, plus if you get the NBA, NFL and everything else that happens there. But you can actually get a portable ultrasound for as little as $2,500 that you can have on the bench.
That's the next step, Ed.
That's what's got to happen.
The game will head toward that path. I think it probably should have been there arguably anyway. But
you can't have this situation where a bloke's running up and down and you're going, "You're right."
Again, Ed, I get what you're saying about the scanners, and I've got the same view on that. I think that needs to be instituted next year. But sometimes people at footy clubs need to protect the player from himself. And Christian Petracca himself said that he was responsible for going back on. But I'm not saying this upon reflection. I think I and others had the same view at the same time. He was not right to run back and return to the field of battle in a combat sport, and he did. And that, to me, is the biggest issue here right now. Now, the AFL obviously has asked the question and signed off on Melbourne's handling of it. I understand all that. But equally, that guy was not right to go back on. And thankfully, he did not get one more knock once he did.
We're sort of agreeing and disagreeing. What I'm about to say, Damo, is the fact that the adrenaline would have been pumping in his body. And when the adrenaline's pumping, you feel like you're fine. And he would have been constantly asked by the doctors, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And he would have gone, "I want to give it a go." And to Ed's point, an internal injury, how are they supposed to know unless they just keep asking?
But the point I'm making...
He couldn't move his left arm. I mean, you saw the same thing as I saw.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I agree with that point, Damo, but the doctors without the equipment are only relying on Christian.
But what we're saying, though, Damo, is let's take the guesswork out of it.
Yeah.
You go in, you have the X-ray, you have time. 5 minutes afterwards, Lordy was fine. 5 minutes afterwards, Christian was fine. You get that ultrasound, you go, hang on a second, we want to check, okay? And you might go, right, 5 minutes...
I'm not disagreeing, and I agree that should be the next step for this. But I still think in the isolation of Monday, with Melbourne's handling of it, a lot of things were let through. And the AFL whole entire industry is now focused heavily on what happens with head knocks. I feel the same should have been at play for Christian Petracca in that moment.
We're in vigorous agreement, but don't forget you've got 4 doctors there and there's an independent AFL emergency doctor who's there as well, who is called into play. What I'm saying is that's all very well, but if you haven't got the machinery to actually check it out...
Yeah, I get
and I'm with you.
The imagery of him walking around with unable to move his arm, and Collingwood players actually looking after him, that's all you need to know.
Mate, we're totally in agreement. Okay, so the thing that focuses everybody up, pardon the pun, is get the imaging machinery in there. It costs nothing in the scheme of things. For a stadium the size of the MCG, not to have this stuff is ridiculous. Move a sports medicine facility into it. When you build Tasmania, put the medical facilities in the stadium. It's not hard. And you can actually use the Monday to Friday, you'll make a quid out of it.
What it does do, Lordo, is increase the pressure on this football club. It is regularly now for the past 18 months in the news for the wrong reasons, and this is another wrong reason, and it's another loss that's now been added to Simon Goodwin, the coach's resume.
Yeah, 10th on the ladder, and they lose arguably their best player outside of Max Gawn, so they've lost 4 of their last 5, and they lose Christian Petracca. So we'll see what Simon Goodwin's made of as a coach. He's a premiership coach. He's got his side to top 4 a number of times, but what I've admired about Carlton and Collingwood is through the injuries, they have such a strong system about themselves that they've been able to keep ticking wins away. They've got North and West Coast in 2 of the next 3 games, so it gives them an opportunity. But has he got it in him, Simon Goodwin, to mix things up, change things up, try and find a new way? They look really flat. They look down on energy. They look down on confidence. They've lost sort of what they stood for, haven't they, Jimmy? That toughness, contest. And again, they're struggling to score.
You can see it in their ball movement against Collingwood. Confidence, and what's further up the ground. You can contrast the 2 teams on Monday. And we know Collingwood plays with a lot of confidence, but they break a line, they get out of their back 50 and they stop.
Lordy, is it caught up with Clayton Oliver with what he didn't do in the performance aspect in the off-season with his off-field troubles, and now we get to the midway point of the season. 9 kicks, 19 handballs on the weekend, but they're not the impactful touches.
Yeah, he's reflective of the team, Damo, right off. So I feel like when he's at his best, he's got a high work rate, he's tough. He's sort of just, he just seems to have lost his impact on the game. Like that contest, he's just throwing the ball in the boot. He looks to be playing with no confidence, and it sort of brings me back to the pre-season discussion where some players were saying, should he play? Others were saying, shouldn't he play? This is probably what the form you would have expected from him at the start of the season. He started the season okay, but it seems like things have caught up with him a little bit.
It does, and obviously their midfield problems as we look at the stark difference between previous season and this current one. And he's won 4 best and fairest in a good team in a great period for this football club, and he's nowhere near that at the moment. But obviously Angus Brayshaw, they lost him medically over the season with the concussion issues. James Jordan, James Harms traded out. They'd be getting games now, I'd imagine, in that midfield.
Yeah. Right down on confidence and energy, Clayton Oliver.
And Tom, just before you go, Clayton Oliver's had all that issue over the summer. You've had the Glenn Bartlett situation, fighting with the coach and the president and the board and everything else. It's been a very unhappy, disrupted club, hasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And Melbourne has attempted to bunker itself down, us versus the world. And in the end, halfway through the season, it looks as if the wheels are coming off. Goodwin has 1 more year beyond this remaining on his contract. And the CEO, Gary Pert and Kate Roffey, have a hard task on their hands trying to get this club back up to where they need to be. Because as you guys know, the window doesn't last forever.
Having said that, they're outside the 8 on percentage, and they've got West Coast and North in their next 2 games and a bye. They can reset themselves pretty quickly and get going. Teams have had troughs all through the year, so they can still do it. There's no doubt about it, but they've got some things to address.